Hello students, good morning. Welcome back. Myself Pushpendra Singh, and today we are going to start with our 7th class history book, all right, which is of NCERT class. All right, so in this session we are going to cover only NCERT's books. We have covered the 6th standard geography book, we have covered the 6th standard history book, both belongs to NCERT. Today we are going to start with the 7th standard NCERT history book, all right, and myself Pushpendra Singh, and we are going to start with the 7th standard history. All right, so let's begin with the book. Okay, so first of all, in the beginning of the book you can find out the maps which were basically given by the many such geographers, right? So one such geographer was basically Al Irdashi. So this geographer have given the map of Indian subcontinent in the 12th century itself. So if you look this map, you can see the South India where we would expect to found, right? And the North India and the Southern India is basically an island at the top. So in this map, it is, if you can zoom this map, you will find that the Sri Lanka is an island at the top. It will be finding, and the South India is basically expected to be found in the south, and the place which is marked or which is named in the Arabic language, which was also used. For example, the few of the places which are also known as the Kannauj, which is located in the state of Uttar Pradesh, is spelled in the basically in the Arabic language as a Kannauj, which was also mentioned in this map. So you can say that the Al Irdashi, who was a geographer who published this map of Indian subcontinent, who has also given the description of the North India, who has given the description of the Sri Lanka, who has given the description of the South India, and who has also mentioned the names of particular cities like Kannauj, which was mentioned as a Kannauj. All right, and this is basically the second map where the French geographer has given this map. Okay, so this map was basically used by the European sailors, right, when they moved from the Europe towards the Indian subcontinent, and the merchants on their voyages, right? And this map, it looks like familiar to us and the coastal areas in a particular, that has such a great detail. So you can look at out this is the map of India, and this is the peninsular part, this is Sri Lanka, and this map was published on that time itself. So it was so detailed that it looks like the today's map. All right, next, the new and old terminologies that was given in the book, you can also refer them. For example, various historical records which were exist, right, in the various languages, right? So that has changed considerably, because those historic records which were there in the original books, that may be written or may not be written. Sometimes that may be written in some other languages, but that would have changed considerably over the period of the years, and the grammar, the vocabulary, even the meanings of the word have changed over the period of the time. So you can say that a bit changes in the context of the writing of the history would have also been changed. For example, the term Hindustan, which we use today, right, which we use the Hindustan for the complete nation state, right? But the meaning Hindustan, which was used in the 13th century, it only means the areas of Punjab, Haryana, and the Ganga Yamuna Do. So you can consider now the Hindustan is meant for the complete nation state. Now Bauer was using this term to describe the geography, the fauna, and the culture of the inhabitants of this subcontinent. So Bauer was the first person who was using or who was referring this term of Hindustan to referring the fauna, culture, the history of the inhabitants of Indian subcontinent. All right, and the term we use basically foreigner, that means some sort of a strange person, right, or the person which is non-Indian. So unlike today, what we use the foreigner is non-Indian, that we refer from the word called foreigner, right? It meant in the history books a strange person, right? Therefore the historians must be careful about the term that they use, because they mean different thing in the past, right? So the word which was describing the word in the book of history has certainly a different set of meanings, all right, let's understand the historians which were basically depicting those, the processes, as well as their sources. From there they have taken those references. For example, the historians used the different type of sources, right, to learn about the past, right? Obviously they would have referred the different type of sources, right, to study, right, to investigate further. And they not only rely on the coins, but they also rely on the inscriptions, right, the architecture, the textual records for the information. And they again republishing those texts, right, in the different form. And and in the initial phases there was no such paper publishing, right? But slowly, with the introduction of the paper, the textual records have been increased. So the previous records is not existing, or they are not, it's not existing because there was no such paper written tradition. But over the period of the time, with the invention of the paper, the textual records have been increasingly survived, and people used to write on these papers. So now the new tradition has started, and the people started using those papers to write some of the holy text, right, to writing certain chronicles regarding, some rulers, some kings, right, started writing, letters, right. The gurus started writing, or the gurus started, teachings through the papers, right. Over the period of the times, the paper started using during petitions, judicial records, right, and also for the registering of the accounts and the taxes. So there was multi such role that was started by using this paper. And the manuscripts which was collected by the wealthy people, right? So you must understand the manuscripts which were written down on the leaf, or on the wood that was basically manufactured, right, from the bark, right? So the manuscripts which were basically collected by the wealthy people, the rulers, the monasteries and the temples, right? So these manuscripts were basically placed in the libraries and archives, and these provide a lot of, the important data regarding the previous history, right? And you must also understand, in the previous time there was no printing press, there was no printing press. And so there was very difficult to copy those manuscripts, right? So people used to write them, right, by the hand itself, right? And definitely if you write by hand, definitely if you write by hand, you would definitely introduce certain small changes, right? For example, it's said the changing the sentences, the changing the word, and even these small changes, grew over the centuries. Because if I write down the same thing, and if you copy my thing on your handwriting, you would definitely make certain changes. If your friend write down your copy, you would definitely make certain changes. So that certain small changes grew over the centuries, right? And until the manuscripts of the same text become substantially different from the one another. All right. So that history, what we learned is basically reinterpreted, right, rewritten into the different contexts and the different meanings, right? And this was a serious problem, because we rarely found the original manuscripts of the author that were there on that time. So there were hardly existing of the original manuscripts even today. And we are totally dependent upon the copies which were made by the latter subscribes. Okay, so those subscribes who were written the letter, we were totally dependent on them. And as a result, the historians have to read the different manuscripts, the different versions of the same text, isn't it? Because if I'm writing something related to same manuscripts, if you're writing something, you will be writing the different version. So the historians who were basically compiling, right, those data, who were extracting this data, who were mining that data, have to refer the different manuscripts, right, the different versions of the manuscripts, right? And also they would have to scan through the writers which were basically publishing those texts, right? And often what happens is these authors revise those chronicles at the different time zones. For example, a chronicle was first written during the Ziauddin Barani, right, who wrote his chronicle first in 1356. Another version was written 2 years later, right? These two differ from each other, but the historians did not know about the existence of first version until 1960s. All right. So this is the fact that though the both were written, right, by Ziauddin Barani, right, and it is his chronicle itself in the 1356, and second is 1358. But the historian did not know about the second one until it was, or the historian did not know about the first one until it was discovered in 1960s. So this is another set of the problems the historians basically facing, that in the absence of the discoveries will be very difficult to relate it to to their roots. All right. Then the new social and the political groups. All right, so what happens is, when you study these historical texts, right, over the thousands of the years, let's say from 700 AD to 1750 AD, right, there is a huge challenge for the historians, right, because the scale and the varieties of the development that occurred over the period of the time, because this is 1,000 years, this is a 1,000 year journey. And for understanding, for reading, for extracting, the historians will have the multiple challenges, right. And various new technologies made their appearance, like for example, a Persian wheel in the irrigation, the spinning wheel in the weaving time, and the firearms in the combat, right. So they different technologies made their appearance. All right. And the different type of fooding habits, beverages arrived in the continents, right. For example, the fooding habits like potatoes, corn, chilies, coffee, tea, etc. has come. So new social and political groups used to form, right. These new technologies like Persian wheel, spinning wheel, the firearms, new food like the potatoes, corns, which were introduced by certain foreigners, right. They came to the people who brought these ideas to the different to the land, and which has changed the culture, the social aspect, the political aspect, right, of the native people. So how the social and the political groups basically re-energized, right. They basically reintegrated into the newer realm, which was basically introduced by the people from the distant land. And this was the period between 700 AD and 1750 AD. This was the period of great mobility. Great mobility means the people used to move from one continent to the another continent, right, from one place to another place, in search of the land, in terms of, in searching of the trade, in search of, say, for different type of spices, in terms of various things. So people started moving, right. The groups of the peoples used to travel the longer distances, right, in search of different opportunities. And you must understand that this continent has the immense wealth and immense possibilities for the people to carve a fortune. So these, some of the people were driven by this fortune. Some of the people were driven by some sort of excitementness of the searching of the new lands. For example, the Vasco da Gama, right, who was a sailor and who discovered the distant land, isn't it, right? So there were different people who discovered the different land, right. And there is a group of people called Rajputs, right, who is very important in this period, right. And also included not just rulers, chieftains, but also the soldiers and the commanders who served in the armies of the different monarch all over the subcontinent, right. So these Rajput, the term we use, right, in this period, this included not just rulers, but also the different type of soldiers, commanders, chieftains, which serve in the armies of different monarch all over the continent. So there was extreme valor, the sense of loyalties. There was some certain qualities that were attributed to the Rajputs, right, by those poets, by those bards. So that qualities of extreme valor, extreme sense of loyalties have been associated with the Rajput. So this term has grown, or this term has changed its meaning from the attachment of, or from the linking of those people with extreme sense of valor and extreme sense of the loyalties. And other group of people, for example, you have the Sikhs, you have the Jats, you have the Marathas. There were different type of people who also use the different opportunities, right, during the time to become a politically most important persons. And throughout this period there was a gradual clearing of the forest, because you must understand, as the empire grows, as those kingdoms grows, right, as the population also grows, right, as the empire grows, the people or the king also need the land to accompany all such armies, right. So it started clearing those forests for the extinction, or for the extinction of the agriculture also. And there is started changing in the habit also, right. For example, the many people who used to migrate in the forest, now they started migrating to the cities, to the villages, right. And others started tilling those agricultural land, and they become peasants. So over the period of the time, the socio-economic changes have taken place in the cultural aspect of the people. Now, these new peasants which came to the distant land started tilling the land. They now gradually become to be influenced by the regional markets, because ultimately they produce the things and they started selling these things, right? So they came to know about the chieftains, priests, monarch, monasteries and temples, and they become the part of large and complex societies, because ultimately they used to serve, right? They used to serve with the societies, and they are required to pay the tax and offer the goods and services to the local lords. So all such people used to pay the tax and certain offering to the local lords, which were there in the at the local level. And the society, as the time grows, the society become more and more differentiated means there were different people. For example, the one set of people belongs to the Rajputs, who were more, who having the sense of valor and the loyalties. The separate set of people become, say for example, the peasants. Another set of people become Maratha, another set of people become priests, right? So that the different people started taking over the different occupations, right? So the people started grouping into the different jatis, or different subgroups, or different subcasts. So these jatis, these subcasts has started growing on the basis of their background and their occupations. So slowly this occupation led, the jati system has evolved. The occupation led jati system has evolved, but the ranks are not fixed permanently, right? Because the ranks are not fixed, because ranks are generally tied with the power, right? So the ranks are basically varied according to the power, according to the influence, according to the resources, according to the resources that are controlled by the particular jati. So they are mobile also from one jati to the another jati. So this is not, the ranking is not fixed, right? Okay. And second most important point is that the status of the same jati could vary from area to area also, right? For example, the jatis which framed their own rules and regulations to manage the conduct of their members, right? These regulations, which are enforced by the assembly of the elders, right? And which ultimately form the jati panchayat. So the status of the jati could vary from the area to area, because in a particular area you will have the elders, you will have the assembly of the elders, which will be forming these regulations. These regulations will ultimately enforced by them, and that is how the jati panchayats jati panchayat started functioning in the certain areas, right? And there was villages also. These villages were governed by the chieftain, who were also the head of the village, and they were together, they were only a small unit of the state, okay? Because you must understand, the villages is the smallest unit of the state. Above the village you may have the towns, you may have the cities, right? And the capitals, and like that you will have the different thing. All right. Then region and the empire. So let's understand, like large states like those have, for example, Cholas, Tughlaqs, Mughals, right? They basically encompass many regions, right? Because these empires were very bigger, right? They have captured the bigger territory, right? And you must understand, uh, there was Delhi Sultan, who was known as the Ghiyasuddin Balwan, who was Delhi Sultan from 1216 to 1287, right? He was the ruler of the vast empire, right? Which was basically stretched from the Bengal in the east to the Ghazni in Afghanistan. So this Delhi Sultan, which ruled from Bengal to Afghanistan, right? And also its empire was extended to the southern India also. A Sanskrit Prasasti has, basically Prasasti means a praise which were written in the Sanskrit language, describe the Ghiyasuddin Balwan, the Ghiyasuddin Balwan, right? Regarding how the big is the empire of the Delhi Sultan. And many historians also regarded, right, that there are certain exaggerated claims of the conquest, because nobody knows or nobody has written down those conquests, right? So they may have exaggerated also. And they try to understand why rulers kept claiming to have the control over the different part of continents, because because of to influence the another kingdom which were lying nearby. So to gain the influence, to gain the control over the distant land, the different rulers started claiming on the control over different parts of the continents, right? And by 700 AD, right, you must understand, many regions started possessing the distinct geographical dimensions, right? And those regions also have their own languages, their own cultural characteristics, isn't it? And they were also started, having or started, different dynasties started evolving over there. And because of this evolution of those dynasties, a continuous fight or the conflict started between the states. So first of all, when you started possessing a different geographical dimensions, the different languages, different cultural characteristics, and you have set up those dynasties, obviously there would be greater chance of fight or conflict between those dynasties also. And occasionally these dynasties which were related to Khilji, Tughlaqs, Mughals, Cholas, right? So they were able to build those empire, right? On the bigger scale, that you can say the pan regional scale, right? So pan regional scale means they were able to expand those empires on spanning of different regions, right? So these empires were equally stable and the successful, right? When the Mughal empire, which were covered the whole of the Indian subcontinent in say 17th and 18th century, when it declined in the 18th century, right? It led to re-emergence of the regional states, because with the declination of the Mughal empire, the regional states were basically re-emerging, right? But you must understand, because of this, the colonial or imperial power, again the pan regional rule has again started setting up because of this colonial empires. And uh, and you must understand, across the most of the subcontinent of this region, right? There were many legacies of these big and small states which ruled over them. And this has led to the emergence of the various traditions, and there were various reliance of the governance, management of the economy, allied cultures, and the language, which also influence the regions in their totality. And over thousands of the years, that were between 780 to 1750 AD, right? The characteristic of these regions grow, right, into different forms, right? So it has, because pan regional forces started integrating themselves, right? Without losing certain set of distinctiveness, which has further led to the evolution of the distinct land. All right, so let's understand the new chapter, which is old and new religions, right? So that is related to, first of all, you must understand, right, that is related to the person's belief, right? The person's belief in certain divine, right? So that should be something personal. Even our Constitution of India also makes the religion something which is personal. So it is your personal sphere. So even the people's belief in the divine is sometime which is deeply personal, right? And which is more usually, it was a collective also, but it is deeply personal, right? When you say the collective belief in certain set of supernatural power, right, a religion started forming. And this religion was started often closely connected with the social organization, with the economic organization of the local communities. And and the word of these groups also altered, so too did their beliefs also. So for example, if their social traditions, social organizations, economic organizations started altered because of any the reason, their belief also started changing. So this is what the collective belief also changes with the time, right? Because of their social condition, economic organization has changed. Now during this period, right, the important changes occurred, right? That we call, in the when you say in terms of Hinduism, right, we started worshipping the deities. For example, new deities comes out, right? We started building the new temples, right? And also there is a growing of the importance of the Brahmins, because Brahmins are basically considered as a priest, right? And the priest or the Brahmins considered or become the most dominant groups in the society. So various things related to the Hinduism started growing, right, during this period. And because the Brahmins were considered the most important, so their knowledge to the Sanskrit text also earned, because also started earned, right? And the Brahmanas, a lot of respect, earning started lot of respect in the society. So they achieved this dominion position or dominant position, and which was later consolidated by their patrons, right? With the support of their patrons, because there is there is a nexus, or there is the important, the relationship between the rulers or their patrons and the brahmanas. So the rulers started patronizing those brahmanas, and these brahmanas started influencing the societies, and they also in turn started growing their respect. So a lot of respect in the society also grows for the brahmanas, and the new rulers also started searching for the prestige, right? So in terms of the searching for the prestige, the brahmanas were given certain patrons under these new rulers, all right. and uh, and you must understand, one such major phenomena that occurred during that period of the time is emergence of bhakti, right? So emergence of bhakti, that is something which is related to the personal deity, right? So that could reach out even without the aid of priest or elaborate rituals. So that bhakti movement which was started, right, which is something, personal deity, right? You don't need the aid of the priest, or you don't need the elaborate rituals for that, right? But you need something which is personal deity, that devotee could reach out even without the assist of priest. And this was the period when the new religions appeared, because you must understand, because of the domination of brahmanas, because the brahmanas were become more influential, they got more respect in the society, so they would have the more dominant position in the society. So the bhakti movement started evolving, because the people in the certain sects, especially, certain people started believing that there is a domination of these brahmins in the society. So a new religion started appeared up in the subcontinent, right, under the bhakti movement. And the merchants and the migrants first brought the teachings of the Holy Quran to India in the 7th century. All right. So these merchants which came from the distant land, for example, in the Central Asia, Western Asia, right, Europe, that has brought the teachings of the Holy Quran to the India in the seventh century first time, right? And since then, the different the patrons of the Islam and ulma basically has increased, and many such rulers were basically patrons of the Islam in India, right? And you must also understand, the Islam was also interpreted in the variety of the ways by its followers, just like a Hinduism, right? So there were different such the interpretation which was given to the Holy Quran when it was introduced by those migrants, which were introduced by those merchants in India. So all right, so because of this idea of the bhakti, which is related to the personal devotion without the assistance of any sort of a priest, because of the dominant position of the brahmanas, the the new religion also appeared during that point of the time. And it was the right time when the religion called Islam, through the Holy Quran, which was introduced in India in the 7th century itself. All right. And you must also understand, there are the two sects of in the Islam. One is called Sunni, and second is called Shia, right? So there was Shia Muslims who believed that the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, which was also known as Ali, was a legitimate leader of Muslim community. Okay, so the Shia beliefs lies in the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, who was Ali, who was the legitimate leader of Muslim community. And the Sunni Muslims, right, who accepted the authority of the early leaders, who were also known as Khalifas, and started succeeding the Khalifas also, right? So there was continuous tussle between the Shias and Sunnis, right? The Sunnis think that there is authority of early leaders, which are also known as Khalifas of the community, and the Shias basically started believing that it is the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, which is also known as Ali, was the legitimate leader of Muslim community. So that is how the two sects in the Muslims started growing. And there were various other the schools of the laws also, right? For example, there is Hanafi law, there is Shafi law, mainly in India, right? And they were also involved in theology and mystic traditions also. So these all traditions, the different schools of law started evolving within the realm of a particular religion called Islam. All right. And when you think about the time and the historic periods of this time, right, the historians do not just see the time, right, just as passing of the hours, day and the years as a clock or the calendar, right. There is some changes which are reflected in the social organization, economic organizations, right? And which has led to the transformation of the ideas and the beliefs. So as I told you in my previous slide that uh, the people are started attaching with the social organization, or the religion are started attaching with the social organization, economic organization. So if any changes occurred in the socio-economic aspect, the belief, the ideas also started transforming, right, with those changes, right? And the study of the time is made somewhat easier by dividing the past into smaller segments or the large segments, which are also known as periods. All right, so we can say that within that period this changes occur, within that period this changes occur. So period means which shared are some special characteristics during that period. All right. And uh, and you know that during the British time, or during the middle of the 19th century, the British historians divided the history of India into three periods that are known as the Hindu period, right? Or the period where the Hindu rulers ruled the country, right? And the Muslim period where the Muslim rulers ruled the country, and the British means the British rulers ruled the country. So they divided based on the religion. They divided based on the religion, that during a particular period, right, which shared a certain characteristics where a particular religion ruled the country. So during the Hindu period time, the Hindu rulers predominantly ruled the country. And this division, which was predominantly based on the idea of religion of the rulers, right, which was only historical changes which were brought by those the 19th century British historians. And it was no other significant developments in the economy, society, and the culture which has led to this dividation. All right. And such dividation also ignored the rich diversity of the continent, because that were purposefully dividing the country so that it can basically divide the country based on the religious lines, so that the Britishers ultimately get benefited out of it. All right. And the few historians follow this periodization even today also, right? Right. So most of the most look to the economic and the social factors to characterize the major elements of the different moments of the past. So most of the historians basically took those factors. All right. And you must understand the thousands of years of the Indian history that we are talking about, the period between 700 AD to the 1750 AD. Okay, we are talking about that witness a considerable changes. Okay, and you must understand what are the different changes occurred. For example, a 16th and the 17th century. Okay, these 16th and the 17th century was quite different from the 8th and the 11th century, right? And that is how we started clubbing those changes on a separate unit, right? And we started describing the entire period in a one historical unit, right? Which does not have any problem in that classification. All right. And you must understand, when you talk about the medieval period, right, it is often contrasted with the modern period. Why we call the medieval period? Because the modernity we have attached with the modern history, because you must have heard about the modern history book, okay, and medieval history book, isn't it? Medieval. Okay, so why we attach this modern word to the history books? First of all, you must understand, so here the modernity carries with a sense of the material progress and the intellectual advancement that we made through the various means. So the modernity is related to that. So but ultimately it is a history of India, it is a history of India. So that is what we made this context with the medieval and with the modern sense, which has led to the sense of material progress and intellectual advancement. And uh, and when you compare this modern history and the medieval one, it seems to suggest that the medieval period was lacking in any change of whatsoever. Any change means the material progress, intellectual advancement. So that was not the case basically in the case of modern history. All right, let's understand the new chapter that is called New Kings and the Kingdoms. New Kings and the Kingdoms. So as I told you that there was emergence of the new dynasties, right? For example, by 7th century, right, I told you that the people started reorganizing themselves into different groups, right? Some people organizing themselves, or recognizing themselves as a Rajputs. Some started organizing themselves as a peasants. Some started organizing as a big landlords or the warrior chiefs. okay, in the different regions, right, of the subcontinents. Now, you must understand the existing kings which were there, they often acknowledge them as their subordinates, or sometimes they are also called samantas. So these samantas in the 7th century were nothing but the big landlords or the warrior chiefs, which were often giving the support to the chiefs or the kings, right? And they were often, considered as a subordinate or the samantas of the king. All right. And you must understand, these subordinates or the samantas, they are expected to bring the gift for their king or the overlords. All right. And uh, and they should be present at their court of the king and provide them with the military support. So as I told you, that these samantas or landlords or the warrior chiefs, they used to, at the service of the king, right? So they used to bring the gift for the king, they used to be present in the courts, they used to provide certain military support to the king. And you must also understand, these samantas, when they gain the power and the wealth, right, some samantas become very very strong, right, very very stronger. So they declare themselves to be mahasamantas or mahamandaleshwara. Okay, that is called the great lord of circle or the region, and so on. So it depends on the power, it depends on the power of, the samantas. If they become much, powerful, much wealthier, they declare themselves as a mahamandaleshwara, or the lord of a circle, or the lord of a region. And sometime in the exceptional circumstances also, they started asserting themselves, right, as an independent, kingdom, or as independent king from the overlord, right? So that instances were happened, right, during the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. So we'll see all such things. So that is how the dynasties basically started evolving since 17th 7th century onward, and that is how the new dynasties were evolving, right, in this period of the time. And you must understand, initially they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnatakas. All right. So when we talk about, Rashtrakutas, right, how the Rashtrakutas came to the power in the Deccan. So when you say, so first of all, you must understand, the Rashtrakutas initially were the subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. All right. So in the middle of the 8th century, there was a Rashtrakuta chief who was also known as Danti Durga, right? So Danti Durga, who was the Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual which is also known as the Golden Worm or Hiranya Garva. And you must understand, there is a certain significance which were involved, right? So when this ritual was performed with the help of Brahmanas by the Danti Durga, who was a Rashtrakuta chief, right? You must understand, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, and even he has not won by birth. So you must understand, right? It has certainly led to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, and though he was not a the Kshatriya by birth, but it has transformed into the Kshatriya. And you must also understand, in other cases, the men from enterprising families use their families' military skills to carve out their kingdoms, right? One such example is basically, the Kadamba Mayursham and the Gaja Pratihara Harichandra were the Brahmanas who gave up their traditional professions of the priest, and they started looking for the arms and successfully established their kingdom, especially in the Karnataka and the Rajasthan, respectively. Right. So this, Kadamba Mayursharam, which was, established their kingdom in the Karnataka, the Gujarat Pratihara Harichandra, which established their kingdom in the Rajasthana, was was the man of enterprising family who used their military skills to set up an independent kingdom. So this independent kingdom can be set up by different means. So first we have seen that there are certain landlords, there are certain, the people who basically acknowledge the landlords, the overlords, but over the period of the time, these people overthrew these overlords, right, and started establishing their own independent kingdom. The one such example was given by Rashtrakutas. Rashtrakutas were basically subordinate to the Chalukyas, right? The Rashtrakuta chief, who was also known as Danti Durga, he overthrew his overlord, which was also the Chalukya overlord, and he performed the Hiranya Garbha, right? And which has led to the establishing of the Rashtrakuta empire, right? So that is how different type of the dynasties have been evolving. And there are another means by which the people started leaving their own professions, right, and using, right, using that family skills to basically build their empire, right? For example, the Gujara Pratihara empire was built in the Rajasthan, right, out of the family skills which were brought, right, to carve out this kingdom, right? So let's understand the administration in these kingdoms, how the administrations used to perform in this kingdom. So many of these new kings, right, which were basically incorporated, which were basically establishing these kingdoms, adopted the high sounding titles, right? The high sounding titles, so that they reflect the valor, they reflect the importance of the new kings. For example, Maharaja Adhiraja, the great king, or overlord of kings, right? Tirubhuvana Chakravartin, that means Lord of three words, and so on. So they started using these titles, right, high sounding titles, as to show and to reflect the power of those kingdoms. And however, you must understand, in spite of such claims, they often shared the power with the Samantas, because you must all understand, there will be a Samantas, or there will be some subordinates who will be helping those people, right? And these Samantas have also the small kings also have their association with the peasants, with the traders, and with the Brahmanas also, right? And these were basically started influencing the started influencing right right the administration of those kingdoms, now each of these states, right, the resources, for example, the resources in terms of grains were basically obtained from the producers, right? The peasants, cattle keepers, artisans will be basically compelled to surrender a part of their produce to the king, right? Because these kings used to collect those produce as as a tax. And sometime, there was acclaimed as the rent which is due to the lord, right, who asserted that he owned the land, and somehow this rent was paid to those landlord. And the revenue was also collected from the traders, right? And these resources were used to finance the capital's establishment. Because how would you say, because you need certain type of resources to feed the people, right? You need the revenue to be collected from the traders. You need the resources to be collected, right, so that you can basically establish those kingdoms, right? So that you can basically use the resources or the revenue for the collection of temples, forts, and etc. And you must also understand, these revenues which were collected from peasants, right, from the traders, they were also used not only for the building of the temples and the forts, but also for fighting the wars or waging the wars. And they also in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of the wealth in the form of plunder and access to the land, as well as the trade routes, right? So they perform certain type of other activities in order to fulfill the different demand that has been came from the different lords. All right. And there were functionaries who were involved in the collection of such revenues. Okay, these functionaries were basically recruited from influential families, right? And many such positions, right, were basically often hereditary means baap ke baad beta banega, so that is hereditary. So that means after father, the son will inherit the position of of that particular the position. So this was true about the army as well, right? Even close relatives of the king held these positions, right, under the king empire. Okay, let's understand the prashasti and the land grants. So what are these prashastis? मैंने आपको बताया था प्रशस्ति के बारे में. Prashastis are basically the praise, or they contain the details, right, that basically in favor of certain king. So these prashastis often may not be literally true, because these prashastis were written under the fear of the king, right? That may be true or that may not be true. All right. But they tell they tell us how the rulers wanted to depict themselves. Obviously, every ruler wanted to depict themselves in a in the most fascinating fashion. Say, I have the greatest valor, I have the greatest, the superhero and something like that. So they will be more valiant, they will be more victorious, they will be like the warriors of the kingdom, like that. So it will be depicting in the this sense. So that will show us, right, how the rulers would want to depict themselves, right? And you must also understand these processes, which are also praise written in the in the favor of a particular king, that were mainly composed by the learned brahmanas. And these brahmanas occasionally help in the administration also, right? And that is how the integration of the brahmanas also increased in the kingdoms also. and and the king who were basically taking the support of those brahmanas for writing down of their own prasastis, the king often reward those brahmanas by the grant of land. And these were recorded on the copper plates, right, which were given to those who received the land, right? So this is what is there. So this recording on the copper plates will tell us the system of the reward which was granted, the granted to the brahmanas as a land. So the grants of the land was given to the brahmanas as a reward for writing a prasasti in favor of the prasastis or the praise of the king. And it was very unusual for with the 12th century that a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of the king who ruled over the Kashmir, right? So it was also there, and this poem was composed by an author named Kalhana, right? So Kalhana was a historian who basically composed a poem containing the history of the king, right? And this Kalhana used a variety of the sources, for example, inscriptions, documents, accounts, and earlier historians also to write his account, right? And unlike the writers of the Prasasti, he was often critical about the rulers and their policies. So that is also most important, that a poem which was composed, right, which containing the history of the kings, not a particular king who ruled over Kashmir. And this was a bit different from the Prasastis, because Prasastis do not contain the critic about the rulers, but this, the document which was basically made by the Kalhana, has the critic, has certain eyewitness documents, has certain other resources, which is also more critical about the rulers and the policies of the rulers also, right? Let's understand the warfare for the wealth. Okay, so what is the warfare for the wealth? There was warfare, or there were wages of the war, right, for the wealth. So during that period of the time, the ruling dynasties, right, were based in a specific region, right? So they try to control uh, the region which is lying nearby to that areas, right, even to the distant land also, right? And often the particularly prized area was the city of Kannauj in the Ganga Valley, right? So for the century, the rulers belonged to the Gujarat Pratihara, the Rashtrakuta, and the Pala dynasties fought for the control over Kannauj. So this Kannauj, which was lying in the Ganga Valley, there were different rulers who fought for this prized land, which was also known as Kannauj. Now, since there were three parties, the one party was Gurjara Pratihara, the second party was Rashtrakuta, and the third party was Pala dynasty. So these three different kingdoms or the rulers fought for the control over the Kannauj. But because there were three parties and there were long drawn conflicts, so historian often described as a three-party struggle for controlling the Kannauj in the Ganga Valley, right? And the rulers also started demonstrating their power, right, by building a large temple. For example, if a particular ruler build a large temple, that will be depicting the strength and the power and the resources of the particular ruler. And you must understand, when a particular ruler attacked on another ruler or another king, they often choose to target the temples, right, which are often extremely rich, because the temples are generally constructed or generally built, right, as a showcase of their power, as a showcase of their resources. So when they target the another kingdoms, or when they target the another king, they often target these temples which are extremely rich, right, in this sense. And one of the best known of such rulers is basically the Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, who was basically the ruler of Afghanistan. So he basically ruled from 997 AD to 1030, and he basically extended his control over the parts of Central Asia, the parts of Iran, and the northwestern part of subcontinent, right? So it has started expanding its part of the subcontinent also, right, or to the Indian subcontinent also. And he basically raided the Indian subcontinent almost every year, right? And his mainly targets was these wealthy temples, because they know, or the Ghazni knows, that the wealthy temples will have the extreme high amount of wealth, right? Including the Somnath temple, who was raided by this the Mahmud Ghazni of Afghanistan. And much of the wealth of Mahmud Ghazni carried away was used to create the splendid capital city at Ghazni, right? So he established a splendid capital at the Ghazni. And you must also understand, right, he was more interested and more fascinating about finding out the people, about the people he has conquered, right? So he entrusted a separate scholar for it, called Al-Baruni. So Al-Baruni was interested to write an account of this subcontinent, right? Because after plunder, he used to take all sort of money, and he entrusted the scholar called Al-Baruni to write the account of the subcontinent in which he has recently raided. And the Al-Baruni wrote a book, or that is called Kitab al-Hind, right, which also remains an important source for the historians, because right because the many such Sanskrit scholars, right, also use this account to prepare their account also. And it was one of the important source of the administration at that period of the time, right? All right. And the other kings who were engaged in the warfare include, the Chamanas, later known as Chauhans, right, who ruled basically the region around Delhi and the Ajmer. All right. The Chamanas, which are also called Chauhans, they also started attempting to expand their control over the west and east, right? And when they started facing the stiff opposition by the Chalukyas, which were basically ruling the Gujarat, and Gandhewalas, or which were ruling basically the western Uttar Pradesh. And the best known Chamana's ruler was Prithviraj III, Prithviraj Chauhan. You might have heard about the ruler called Prithviraj Chauhan, or Prithviraj III, who defeated an Afghan ruler called Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 AD. But he ultimately lost to him, right, the very next year in 1192. So, all right. So, the one such ruler was basically the Prithviraj III, who defeated this Afghan ruler, and all such empires started expanding their empire in order to control over their adjacent empire. All right. So that's all. And from this slide, we will continue tomorrow. All right. So we are finishing here, and we are binding our class here itself, and we'll continue the cholas in the next class. All right. So we'll bind up today's session itself. Thank you very much.